Alright, in this video I want to get into why you shouldn't waste your time with atheists. You just maybe plant some seeds and walk away and let God deal with them, right? Because just to be blunt, they deny God, so they're fools. And if you ignore a fool, they're going to think they're wise in their own deceit. And if you confront a fool, they're just going to be upset with you. And like Jesus said, do not give your pearls before swine and dogs, because they don't care about the truth. They'll just rend it, and then they'll rend you as well. So after this, I'm going to remove this post that I put in an atheist group and leave the group. I know they'll take that as some kind of defeat, but I'm going to make this video beforehand, because I basically did this out of boredom. I wanted to get into some action here, and it's this group: Atheism, Reason, and Logic for Humanity versus Theism. So it's not like Christianity, Islam, Judaism, it's just theism, belief in God. So that's what I decided to just focus on, not as a Christian, just as a theist, right? And I say here, thanks for adding me to the group. I wanted to share this and see the response I would get for it. Science proves the existence of God. If you got the time, check out my video, because it would take a while to type all the info out. And I decided to give a little bit of the info because I know a lot of people wouldn't watch the video, so I figured we can discuss just a couple of the simple basic stuff, right? Such as life and consciousness only comes from something alive and conscious. To believe anything else is imagination and not science, which is true. Through science is what we can actually observe and test and retest. And by actually doing that, we see that life only comes from life and consciousness only comes from something conscious. Nothing else happens. You can't rub two rocks together and get something conscious or alive, right? There's no experiment to bring non-living matter to life. As a matter of fact, you can have a perfectly good human body put together like a Frankenstein of healthy body parts that are all compatible together because of blood type and genetics and everything, right? But you can't make it live. You might be able to force the heart to beat and the lungs to work and say that it's alive, but it's artificially because you're using some kind of electricity, an iron lung or something, and then again it wouldn't be conscious, right? So you can do all these things to kind of fake it and puff it up, right? Like Weekend at Bernie's or something, right? But it's not real, it's fake, it's a joke, just like the movie, right? And DNA shows that information is only getting scrambled and lost through reproduction. And any random additions cause problems such as Down syndrome and other crippling defects. To believe otherwise is again imagination and not science, right? And then of course I warn the atheist, because you're not going to have any excuse because Judgment Day, because there's people like me who give you something simple and you chew it up, it spit it out, and then you start attacking the people who bring it to you. Now, I have not been disrespectful to these people, but we'll get into the response, and it's probably nothing that's going to shock any of you, right? The first one here is this guy says, well, the case is settled then. And it's like, okay, you agree. He's not arguing with the science, right? How many persons were in the God that was proven by science? Did it have a holy book and or prophets? How did they rule out Disposablia, mother of all things, the goddess that gave her life for the existence of the ordered universe, or was it her they proven? And like I said, just here as a theist, it's about atheism versus theism as the title of this group, right? This subject is about proving the existence of God, not God's name, not God's character, not who God is, if he has a religion, if it's more deistic where he just left everything alone, if he's a personal God, nothing about that, just that he exists or it exists, right? That's all. So that's what I basically have to keep reminding these people, because they're not going to focus on just the simple thing I brought forward. Like I said, I didn't think they were going to actually check out the video. especially since it's over a half hour. I think it's about 45 minutes. So, like I said, I just brought up a couple of points that they could talk about. And the first person doesn't get into the science at all. They just jump to something else. And that's what you notice about atheists, is the different arguments they'll use. One of them is a red herring. Let's change the subject to something else, right? And that's exactly what this first guy did. Cheap philosophy. Jumps to something else. Well, why aren't we focusing on the science, especially the science I brought up that proved the existence of God? You start off by saying it's settled, right? And he eventually gets to a point where he says exists, as in present tense, right? Like this God exists now. So he's basically saying, well, okay, I can't fight against the science that proves that God exists to create everything, right? But maybe God is dead, right? And it was like, well, science would have to prove that he's dead, right? I mean, why would this God have to die? I mean, where are you getting this? It's just another excuse. Okay, well, science proves God exists. Well, God's dead. Well, that's just speculation and imagination again now, isn't it? First you speculate and imagine that God doesn't exist, and now you speculate and imagine that he's dead once he's proven to exist, right? And I was like, well, if this God is able to bring forth life and consciousness and everything that actually is from himself, then it's easy to see that he's self-sustaining and does not need to die and does not need anything to sustain himself. And it's kind of like how atheists try to say the universe always existed and is a closed system, and energy can't be created or destroyed, just is going to keep on going, right? That should let them know that when they die, they don't cease to exist. So they should know judgment's coming. All the science points to it, but they don't want to accept that. They gladly accept that they're monkeys so that they can act like monkeys, which is how it seems to be when you talk to them. It's hard to actually sit and discuss things and reason with these people. It just doesn't seem to work out that way. I was actually going to bring up a tab showing the difference between debating and discussing, because debating is more about trying to win people over to your point of view, whether it's true or right or not. And you just go with it and you fight your side no matter what, even if you're wrong, just to win people over. That's a debate. While discussing is actually just talking things out and actually trying to find the truth, not trying to disprove one another and win people over to your point of view, but to be open to being right or wrong and just going for the truth. And when you talk to atheists, you might discuss things, but they're debating. So they're going to do all kinds of tactics instead of actually discuss it. Because if they did that, they would come to the knowledge of the truth, which they do not want to accept. Right? This guy gets into talking about the watch is still ticking after the watchmaker died. It doesn't mean the watchmaker's still alive, right? And I was like, I'm not talking about the creation. I'm talking about God and his existence and his self-sustaining ability. Never mentioned anything about the creation. And this person tried to make it sound as though I'm saying that that God is the proof of God is that we're still alive and still ticking. And it was like, never said these things. I just ignored this Pamela lady here because she had a post, a comment that I deleted that was just saying, I'm not going to listen to your video and going on about it. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm just going to remove your comment because it's more of a distraction. If you're not going to talk about anything and get into this discussion, just go away or something, do something else. Why are you going to tell, oh, I'm not taking part of this? All right, then why are you leaving a comment? All right, this doesn't make sense. Uh, some of the stuff you could just pause and go over. I know it would take forever if I were to read everything, and then I would probably find misspellings and have to correct some of my typos or whatever. Um, this guy is trying to make an argument here that, oh, we'll basically find one day that life came from non-living things and consciousness came from something not conscious. And it's like, well, that's speculation and imagination. That's not science. You could believe that, but that's faith. That's all that is. That's not reality. It's a delusion. Uh, this guy, Kosh. Okay, he's like, you bringing up this information gets only lost nonsense that has been debunked thousands of times. Thought it was funny. It's like it was debunked thousands of times. We'll bring up one of the 1,000 times it was debunked. What you find out with atheists is they will make claims all day long, but evidence to back up the claims, not so much, right? And he's like, let's ignore for the time being consciousness, because he's like, oh, it's irrelevant, yeah, if there's no life, right? So let's start with life. What do you think life is? I imagine he meant, what do you think life is? Living things are made of, right? And it was like, well, it doesn't matter, right? Because you can have all the building blocks to build life, such as I brought up, like a Frankenstein, perfectly healthy body. It doesn't just live. You can zap it with lightning. You can even get the heart pumping with electrocution and get iron lung for the lungs to go. It's not going to bring it to life, right? I mean, if that was that easy, that these non-living material can just come together and form life, why does anybody die? Why couldn't we just keep everybody alive? I mean, their body's made up of the life anyway, right? And we got everything we need right here. Why can't we just keep it alive? I mean, if it could just randomly come together in a atmosphere that couldn't really sustain life, but we're in an atmosphere that can sustain life, and we have everything we need to be alive because we're alive, why can't we just keep it alive or bring it back to life? Oh, think about it. Anyway, this person gets into, again, side subject that I have to keep bringing up with these people because they want to ignore the science. So he goes into what God, or what religion, and so on and so forth. And it's like, I'm not into that. This is about theism, about just God existing. So I have to bring that up. I have to bring these guys back into the subject, because if not, they will go on and on. And then this guy makes a complete fool of himself right here. Really does. And then he tries to clean it up. I'm actually going to read this one because it's kind of silly. He says, I watched the first 2 minutes of your video, and you actually managed in that 2 minutes to demonstrate that you really have no clue what science is. The scientific method is what it is because we know we can't trust our sense perception. It's the attempt to understand the world despite that problem, and because we know that despite our best efforts, we will never really be able to overcome that problem. Science deals only with probabilities and acknowledges that there is no absolute certainty for us. What a genius. And you could see the funny thing at the end of this. He's like, what a genius. And he's like, there is no absolute certainty for us. Is that absolutely certain? You can see how he ends it with a contradiction that makes no sense. There is no absolute certainty, but is that absolutely certain? You're absolutely certain there's now absolute certainty. You got yourself in a little pickle there, buddy. So you can see how he makes himself look silly and then calls me the genius. So that was pretty funny. And I do these upside down smiley faces because it's a way of me telling them I have to look upside down to see their point of view, because they see everything upside down. I don't know if they get that, but hopefully psychologically, subconsciously they do. But anyway, he says, we know we can't trust our sense perception, right? But science is all about what you can observe, such as using measurements to observe things and do experiments. You have to be able to observe. And if you can't trust your observation, then you can't trust the measurements. You can't trust anything. Right? It's just nonsensical. If you can't trust your own senses, then how can you trust the science that uses observation, measurements, or any of these things? You can't trust the information that's coming to you. You have to be able to trust your senses to be able to use science. So anyway, continuing on with this here, I have to bring up a definition of science. I don't know if this is too small. It says, the observation, identification, description, experimental investigation, and theoretical explanation of phenomena. Such activities restricted to a class of natural phenomena. And I give a little link, but the first thing, observation. But you can't use your observation because you can't trust it. But science is about observing, testing, and observing the results, and then keep testing and observing the results. So I give the little link, and then this guy, he tries to save himself here. He ignores the absolute. So he's smart enough to ignore that. Not necessarily smart because he can't accept, the truth there of what he said, but he's smart to ignore it in the sense of he's debating and trying to win things over to his side, right? He says those definitions talk about what is done. I'm talking about why it's done the way it is done. So he doesn't care about the definition and that you have to use observation to do science. He's talking about something else. He's above everything else, I guess. I don't know. He says, why does science prefer measurements over pure observation whenever possible? You need pure observation to observe measurements. Right? Why does science insist on repeatability? To make sure the measurement's correct, right? This has to do with observation again, because if you repeat the measurement, you repeat the experiment, you're repeating the observation. Why does science insist on peer review? Peer review, somebody else observes what you've done. And repeat checking, repeatedly observing, not only the results, but also the methodology by as many independent people and from as many angles as possible. As many angles? What, you mean you change your angle of observation? It's all about observation. And most of all, why after all of this does science still insist that we still can't be 100% certain of the results? Because we are aware of our limitations. 100% certain. We can't be 100% certain. How can you be 100% if you can't be 100% certain? If you can't be 100% certain, then you're 100% certain that you can't be 100% certain. There's a bit of a contradiction there. Can't be 100% certain. Why can't you? Because you're being 100% certain that you 100% can't be certain. There's a little bit of a mix-up right here with this guy. But anyway, this guy gets a bit long here. It's more of a, you can read here, kind of mocks me a little bit. But right here, where he actually gets into, right here, actually above here, gene duplication. He doesn't give an example of gene duplication and how it's beneficial, right? This is not true. You have gene duplication where you have chromosomes duplicate, you get Down syndrome. You got protein duplication, you get people who are crippled. So the duplications and information being added to the DNA actually causes a lot of problems. Because you need to look at DNA as a book of truth, right? You can change the order of the truth. It's still truth, and it still can work, right? ignore some of the pages of truth. So, some genes are turned off and some are turned on. So you're actually reading some pages of the truth, but not others. It's still truth, right? You can actually completely remove half the book, but the half that you got is still truth, right? But if you add stuff to it, it's no longer truth, and it all gunks up and it messes everything up. It only takes a little bit to do it. He says, life and consciousness only comes from something alive and conscious. This is funny. He says, this is an argument coming from ignorance. You can't think of no way that it can have happened, so you insert your God to fill the gaps in the knowledge. So if I don't imagine and speculate how life came from something not living or not conscious, then I'm coming from ignorance. Even though what you're doing is not science. Science shows that life only comes from something living and consciousness only comes from something conscious. That's science. That's what we can actually observe and test and experiment with. Yet it's ignorance. Because I can't imagine and speculate something else. It is just insane. And he says, your position of God, I don't have any evidence, so it can be dismissed without evidence. Except I gave evidence, you just ignore the evidence, such as life can only come from life and consciousness can only come from something conscious. You completely ignore that and say, well, I speculate and imagine that it can. Boom, I win. Okay, well, if that's how we're going to do, I speculate and imagine that you're wrong about everything and I'm right about everything, so I win. Boom, gotcha, loser. Right? This is just stupid. And I accidentally, I guess, put my answer here to him. I didn't mean to. It's under his comment instead of actually in his thread. This guy responded about gene duplication has only resulted in harmful effects. He brought up there's a red rat with 102 chromosomes, and there's a different rat that has 56. And they say, but there's like repetitive segments in this rat. Okay, well, prove this first rat with 56 duplicated what it had and became the other rat. You're speculating and imagining. What most likely happened is this red Vishchaka rat, through reproduction, slowly lost information to become this rat. Because that's all we see happening. Such was when we breed dogs from wolves. We take the information that's from the wolf and we're able to scramble that information and lose information to get the different breeds of dogs, but we can't reverse the process and take, let's say, Chihuahuas and reverse breed them until all of a sudden we get wolves by adding information back. You just can't do it because it's impossible. Like Aaron Ross said, who's a hardcore atheist, the offspring, the children, cannot rise above the ancestry, the parents, in their genetic information. So if your parents, they both have 100 base pairs of DNA, you can't have more than 100 base pairs, or else there's going to be a defect. You can have a parent that has 100 and a parent that has 90 base pairs in the DNA. You can't get above 100. You might have more than the 90, even all the way to 99, but you're never going to get over that 100 of that parent who has the most. And anyway, I was going to just remove this comment because this is what you get a lot of. There was a few comments I had to remove because they were just obnoxious like this. This guy says, consciousness must come from consciousness. That doesn't need to come from consciousness because Jesus. And I mean, that's just a stupid joke, even for an atheist. I mean, a lot of times atheists, they can come up with something at least somewhat comical or like hardcore insulting. But this is weak. This is weak sauce right here. This is silly. But I mean, I don't even take it as mocking, right? It's like a child come up and saying I'm stupid. It's like, okay, I'm not going to argue with the 5-year-old, am I? But anyway, I imagine these posts, these comments, are them actually responding. I'm actually done. I'm getting the impression that I shouldn't have joined this chat. I don't think it was productive. I don't think there's any fruit that's going to come from this. More just like frustration, because that's how it is with atheists. You're just going to get mocked. The subject's going to be changed. Um, they're going to be jumping through hoops. They're going to ignore evidence, twist things, move the goalpost. It's not worth it. Um, but anyway, that is that. And that's why you probably should just pray for those who don't believe and work with those who already do believe. Because then you can actually discuss the truth, right? Instead of wasting your time with this stuff. It is very silly stuff. If anything, just post things and talk about things that have to do with science, proving God, but more to build faith with people who already believe, so that they don't get discouraged when atheists come up with some crazy things they come up with. Because atheists, they'll just make claims, and if you don't know what's what, you won't have an answer, and you might actually think they're right. But they're just loud and obnoxious, and they'll say anything. They have no moral standard. So they'll do anything and say anything. Because in their mind, they're just trying to win a debate. It's not about the truth or anything like that. So anyway, thanks for watching and take care.